This is going to be the Advanced Settings feature overview, and this will cover the features in Advanced Settings as of 5.7.4. This is the landing page. As you can see, you can apply video profiles or chaperone profiles. We will cover those and what they are later when we get to where you can make those. Then you have some basic information, including some frame information and potentially other useful information, as well as being able to adjust your microphone volume or mute your microphone, as well as enabling and disabling push to talk. And we have the version number that you are on in the bottom right. First up, we will look at the Steam VR tab. This tab should contain features that are essentially Steam VR features, in quotes. We have a timing overlay, which displays a basic frame time graph pinned to your headset. We have the allow multiple drivers. This will allow you to have multiple drivers. You need this checked in multiple driver setups. So if you're doing like a quest and full body tracking, you would need this checked on. Disable notifications will disable your Steam notifications in VR, the ones that pop up from the bottom. Enable system button binding allows you to use the system button for bindings in games. And no fade to grid, if enabled, will, when VR stalls, prevent you from fading out to grid. I do not recommend turning this on. It is generally pretty nauseating. Camera, this will probably only work on Vive and Index headsets, but essentially you can get a camera pop-up when you get close to your chaperones, or you can see the camera on your controller if you want. And finally, we have binds. This is a per app application binding setup. This is good for any application, not just Advanced Settings. This key here is Advanced Settings key, and others can be found in the official documentation, or you can just Google app ID in your application and see what it is. I will cover this better in a different guide, but understand this is a way that you can change bindings for Advanced Settings on a per game basis. Finally, down here, we have device pairing information. And what this category is, it will show all of your dongles, used Steam VR dongles, and what they are connected to. It is possible to pair this. You can follow the instructions, but especially if you're using extra dongles, you may want to use this, as controllers generally prefer to be paired to the headset, and they may not like being paired to your standard dongles. This is your Vive or your Steam dongles, or the Tundra dongle if you have one of those. So this just provides useful information for that and allows you to set what you want to bind stuff to. It's pretty simple. You put your controller into bind mode and you hit pair, and it should pair pretty much right away. And then this is a quick option to restart Steam VR. Now we will move to the Chaperone tab. And here is where we can make our profiles. And these are the settings that will be saved when you create a profile and a name, obviously. But essentially you can just automatically switch between a couple saved profiles, including your geometry and your style choices. Okay. We have some basic chaperone settings. This generally will only affect the native chaperone, so if you're on a quest with the Guardian system or something else, this won't really do anything. You can adjust the opacity, how far this fades out. You'll notice that I have it as 0 because I have this as disabled, and how high up the chaperone goes. The center marker will enable a center marker in your play area that also shows a turn indicator of which way you need to turn if you need to toggle your thing. Play space. which will show your play area that you have saved, and force bounds, which will force your chaperone bounds to show. This will have to be clicked every time. If you want it on, it does not save through restarts. Then we have some proximity settings. Essentially, this will switch to the beginner mode if you're close to the edge. You can get triggers on your controllers. You can get an audio warning as you get close to the edge, or you can open your dashboard, which is this window. And we have additional chaperone settings. This affects the color of your chaperone, and this is your basic settings. This is the beginner mode, and essentially it is just how full this is. You saw earlier the sparse is just one line in the middle of your height, as well as your floor and ceiling height, and then you have floor only. We have a couple options. You can have it so your floor bounds are always on, or you can have a legacy center marker, which this one is the built-in to Steam VR. And we can disable chaperone below a certain height. If you say are on the floor and you do not want your chaperone, this is a good option. And as well as we have our turn counter reset. If you want to set that to 0, it can get off over time. You can rotate the orientation of your play area. This is permanent and should persist through resets. As always, you can rerun room setup if you need to. And then we have some other options that you shouldn't need to use. Next up, we will have our offsets. If you want to have an offset profile, you can make it here and simply create it. That's it. It will just grab your current offset values if you need it. This rotate space should not persist through restarts. And this is essentially the same values that space drag would move, but in a manual fashion. And you can reset them, or you can lock the individual axes. This will trigger a seated recenter. Pretty self-explanatory. We can move on. Motion tab. This is your space drag. If you want to use space drag, you will need to have these checked, as well as have the keybinds bound. Comfort mode. This essentially generates it so you jump. A10, you will have to drag for a while before you move at all, and then you will kind of jump when you move. Force bounds will force the bounds, obviously, while you're dragging. Ignore boundary state. If you have issues and don't move, click this. You will have to click it every time if you want to use it, but it will cause us to ignore any chaperone warnings that may exist in code. Now, the drag multiplier does just that. If you want to move your hand a little bit and go a long ways, you can adjust this to be a higher value. These are quick cuts, or you can enter it directly. This is our toggle, and you can see if you toggle it on, it should, but obviously doesn't, adjust your height. If you have this keybound and you click this, it should toggle your height to whatever this is set to. Down or up, a little thing. This is essentially a quick crouch, or if you sit down and you want to not sit, or vice versa, this is a quick way to change that. This is your gravity settings. This is your on and off, your strength. These are just cute little shortcuts to different gravity values. And these you can play with in space drag, but essentially they do what you think. This causes you to fling yourself if you're throwing yourself. This causes you to save momentum and slide a bit when you land on the ground. And friction is how quickly you would slow down. That's about it for motion. Going forward to rotation, we have a lot of options. This is pretty dense, but first we have our auto turn option. And essentially this is When you get close to an angle or to a corner, it will rotate you. There's a lot of options here, but essentially when you get close to the corner of a play space, it will rotate you away from that. This are a lot of different settings on how fast it does it, etc. But theoretically, if you use this, you don't need to turn with your controller. Vestibular motion, this is what you would see as redirected walking. This will be, if you use this, it is pretty motion sick inducing in what most people have for a play space. This imperceptible is a 22 meter radius, because that's what some papers seem to suggest as it being imperceptible. Obviously not many people have something that's 22 meters or, you know, like 75 feet across. So in general, this will either slightly extend your play area if you use it by walking around, or nothing at all, but it is an option. This is what most people would consider redirected walking. View ratcheting is essentially similar to auto turn, except it just moves your viewpoint to encourage you away from your wall. And then space turn, this is like your space drag, but it's turning instead of moving you. And then you have your configuration for your snap turning and your smooth turning. If you want to use these features, they are in the bindings. Next up, we have our space fix. Pretty much self-explanatory here. The biggest one that you will probably use is if your floor is off, you will place a controller on the floor, hit fix floor, and it should clear you. These other settings will cause you to kick out of some of the changes that you may make with space drag, or if you space drag to a different position and you want this as your new center, you can use this, and theoretically that should maintain your new center through restarts. Okay, this is the audio settings. If you want to use them, you need to have toggle overrides on, but you can select what device you want, and so these are your speakers, these are your microphones, they're drop downs for what you can select. You can adjust volume for your microphone, and if you want to mirror it, you can adjust that volume as well. Proximity sensor mutes and unmutes mics. If you have a proximity sensor in your headset, Quests and Indexes and Vives have this, but some things like the Pimaxes do not. Enabling push to talk. This enables a notification for your push to talk in the top right of your screen, like, and push to mute essentially changes it so you are muting when you press your keybind instead of unmuting. In video settings, we have a lot of options. We have our brightness overlay, which essentially acts as a dim. How this actually works is there is just an overlay that is very close to your face. And as you can see, if you get things really close, they are no longer affected by it, but it gives you a simulated brightness. We have our color adjustment. You should note that this adjustment is only for like the index, and if you want to adjust color on your headset, you may need to use the overlay for color. We will cover that in a minute. Super sampling. This is the same as Steam super sampling, and essentially it is just your super sampling value. And video profiles essentially takes all this data and saves it, and you can apply them as you want. Motion smoothing, this enables and disables motion smoothing. This is Steam's motion smoothing. Advanced super sample filtering is anti-stropic filtering. Leave this on. It has a very minor performance disadvantage for very good benefits. And then we have our use overlay for color. And if we do this, we can see that we have some things that change up here. And when we do this, we can see this is the same, the brightness, but then we see this opacity, and it may look like we have a white, but in doing this, we can adjust the values and get different color adjustments if we need. And this will work with every headset as it is strictly done via an overlay. Moving forward, we have our utility tab. These are, we'll start at the top. This is just quick little keybinds. This will send the appropriate keystrokes based on what they are. These are the same as the actions for your keyboards. The custom key actions are the same. You have an alarm clock. This is very simple alarm clock that will go off. You will get a notification in the center of your screen when it goes off. It is very annoying. It is very unfinished, but it will get your attention if you are in VR. And then we have our media control keys, which send keybinds. This is previous track, this is stop, this is pause and play, and this is next track. It will vary based on what media player you use, but they are pretty good. You may need to have the media player selected for it to use. Just our current system stats here. Useful information or fun information, and you can reset them all here. Then before I click bindings, which will open the bindings window, we will check out settings. This is the advanced settings volume. This adjusts the click volume, but it does not adjust the alarm volumes. Auto start, this just starts with Steam VR. In some setups, you may need this if you are using like other things like Play Space Mover. You may need to use this. In general, these features are mostly deprecated now for old style motion and allowing external app chaperone edits, but if you're having issues with space drag, you should try to use these. This rotates around the universe center instead of your HMD for your rotation adjustments, like space turn or snap turn and stuff. This enable automatic crash recovery of chaperone config essentially changes your behavior of your chaperone a bit, and if you crash, we try to automatically recover it. Generally speaking, I haven't seen this to be an issue, and it can cause issues if you have it on. If you're crashing a lot and your chaperone's screwing up, you may want to try it. Otherwise, I would encourage leaving it off. This will disable the notification that there's a new version if you don't want to see it. This is an experimental feature where we force use of the Steam VR Chaperone, the native Chaperone, versus the Windows MR bounds or the Quest bounds. Based on testing that I've seen, you need to rerun room setup every time if you do this, so it's not a great solution. This you can use to apply a chaperone profile every time you start up. This is another one. This force use Steam VR. In some apps, if you start them, if you are on an Oculus headset or a Meta headset, you will sometimes notice that they launch in the Oculus API instead of the Steam VR, so you can't use advanced settings. This will fix it for a few games. This is not a great solution, and mostly falling out of favor as the Oculus API leaves the computer space more and more for the favor of the standalones. generally speaking, using things like virtual desktop are just a better option instead of trying to use this. And this exclusive input toggle enables exclusive input. And what that means is essentially you will have to bind the exclusive input toggle keybind. And when you click that keybind, you will toggle between either advanced settings bindings or your game bindings. So essentially you could be playing and shooting enemies or whatever, and then you could click this keybind and space drag a bit and then click it again and you'd be back. It essentially blocks off and prevents you from using advanced settings keybinds while you're playing a game, unless you toggle this on. And then adjust chaperone. This should be off and would encourage it to stay off. Essentially, it will, if you toggle it on, move the chaperone when you space drag, causing it to work a little weirdly. Yeah, be careful. And then disable app vsync. Advanced settings runs essentially every time there's a new frame. Advanced settings will run. And if you don't want this, you can disable it and you can select a custom rate. 250 milliseconds is very long. I will say if you do this, it will make some things like space drag less responsive. So you need to be aware of that. But if you're having performance issues, a good way to start is, say, set this to 50 milliseconds or something, and if that doesn't help performance, it's probably not advanced settings' fault. If it does, then we're probably causing performance hits. So typically, every tick of our program in a 90 hertz headset would be about every 16 milliseconds for reference. And if you're in like 120 hertz, it's going to be about 8 milliseconds. And then finally, we have a shutdown. This will literally just shut down advanced settings if you want to close it out for whatever reason. And finally, we have the bindings key, which if you click it, it should pop you into the bindings for advanced settings. So that is it for the basic overview of advanced settings and all the features. Obviously skipped over some of the more complex features, but should look out for specific guides for them. So that's all.